I think that traveling overseas gives you a change of perspective, and it's a perspective we can bring back here. And you see this perspective with Jesus here in Matthew chapter 9, verse 35. Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. So we're taking this 1 week break from our Jesus series to report on Thailand, but it's not entirely a break, because I think we can point out this constant practice from Jesus from all the interactions that we've had already, and it's evident in our text here. So Jesus and his disciples during Jesus' earthly ministry, they go from city to city, village to village, teaching, proclaiming the gospel. And what we see from his disciples is we see them reacting to people based on social cues, based on social norms. So as they come across well, Jesus, don't talk with her. She's a woman. And teachers, rabbis, they don't speak to women in public. Well, don't talk to them, Jesus. They're Samaritans. And Samaritans were considered half-breeds, right? So we don't talk to them. We cross the road to avoid them. Well, Jesus, don't interrupt your important gospel talk for these children, because they're just children. We've got no time for them. So over and over again, you see the disciples reacting to people they come in contact with, kind of relying on their social cues, just basically dividing people up by category and then dismissing them because of that. Each time they see, rather than seeing people, they see a category of people, and incidentally, it's a category that allows them to feel superior, to dismiss them as somebody that's not important, or that would never be interested, or that doesn't need to hear. And so over and over again, the disciples are dismissing everyone in front of them. And in each of those instances, we see Jesus doing exactly the opposite. So there's this Samaritan woman at the well. And when we get to our parable on the Good Samaritan, we'll talk about that cultural difference between the Jews and the Samaritans. Okay, but not only did rabbis not speak to women in public, okay, it wasn't because it was from the Bible, it was just what they decided was the case, what was proper. Jesus, of course, blew that wide open. But Jews didn't speak with Samaritans, let alone drink out of the same vessel, let alone be in a conversation with them. So here comes a Samaritan woman, and the disciples are avoiding her, but Jesus, he has compassion. This is why he came. So he reveals to her that he's the Christ and he's come to save her. Or another example, large crowds gathering around Jesus, and then all of a sudden these little rugrats, right? They want to come see Jesus too. And the disciples, they have no time for that. Jesus doesn't have time for you. They push him away. But Jesus knows what's happening, and he pauses, and he pushes the important people away. And he brings those important little ones to him. Or the man that's lame from birth, the disciples are pretty sure he deserved it for some reason. They're so dismissive of this man who's lame from birth that they're talking about whose fault is it, him or his parents, while he's right there. He's lame, he can't walk, but he's not deaf. But they don't care. They act as if he has no standing at all. But Jesus stops to engage. Or even just one more. How about the woman taken in adultery? Conveniently, her lover was left alone, and that's probably because the person she was committing adultery with was a friend of the Pharisees, or maybe one of the Pharisees himself. She's dragged in front of the crowd. She's publicly humiliated, stones in hand, but Jesus sees her differently. Oh, she's a sinner, but so is the entire crowd. And that's what Jesus says, that he who's sinless throw the first stone. But that's why he came. He came to rescue sinners. He came to redeem. And over again, the disciples see people as categories. There's also an interesting dynamic among the disciples. Matthew was a tax collector. He was considered a traitor. Okay, he was Jewish, but he was working for the Roman oppressors. Then another disciple was Simon the Zealot. Their entire life's goal was to overthrow Rome. I can't imagine what some of those fireside conversations must have been like as disciples when you got somebody working for Rome as a traitor and somebody whose life goal was to overthrow Rome. But all that was put aside because of Jesus, because they worshiped him. Over and over, the disciples, they see people as categories. They dismiss them because, well, they're so-and-so. This is what they believe. They'd never be interested. They don't need to hear it. Child, Samaritan, crippled, adulteress, and over again, Jesus sees them as something else. And in our text, the crowds, they keep coming. They just keep coming after Jesus. They want to be right there. They touch, they pull, they grab. They're relentless. And I don't know about you, but when I see a crowd like that, I typically like to go the other way, right? Like, people. This world would be so good if it wasn't for people, right? Like, give me a pet instead, right? That's kind of how we approach it, but not Jesus. Jesus' emotional and immediate response to these relentless crowds, what is it? Verse 36. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. His response is compassion. His response is heartbreak. Why? Because they're troubled. Because they're helpless. Because they're sheep with no shepherd. They're lost. They don't know they're lost. They're pretty confident if they need to be saved, if it's somehow about meeting God and earning God's favor, they're pretty confident that they're good enough to do that very thing. But Jesus knows there's nothing further from the truth. It's why he's come, to rescue, to redeem, to save. And so his heart, when he sees these people, he doesn't see them as categories. He sees them as sheep without a shepherd. He has compassion on the crowds because they need to know why he's come. Seeing the video reminded me, that video when you saw the overlook of the city, that's from Bayok Tower in Bangkok. And it's 85 stories tall, and at the last story, you can get up there, and it's a revolving tower. So you go up there and you look over just the sprawling, growing city of Bangkok. 6 million people, half of 1%, broadly speaking, know Jesus. The village school that we're in, many of those kids, they have no real concept of who Jesus is. Pretty sure it's an American religion. Those are sheep who have no shepherd. Those are people that need to know why Jesus came. They need to know that Jesus came for them, to save them. Short-term trips like what we took, they provide this reality check for us, this wake-up call. I think we can bring that back to our country, and this perspective of Jesus would be important in this country because it's a pretty divisive time, isn't it? You have social media, you have pundits, you have 24-hour news shows, you have talk radio, all of them perpetuated. So we don't see people like Jesus, but we should. We're his followers. But we don't see people like Jesus. We don't. Christ's mission doesn't drive us. Political parties do. So we shake our heads at snowflakes. We mock liberals, laugh at their tears. Conservatives are racist. Immigrants that are only here to take our jobs. The only category that I think that could possibly deserve our derision is Canadians because they ruined bacon. Okay, like Canadian, that's not even bacon. Okay, other than that, we conveniently, like the disciples, we see people as anything but the way that Jesus sees them. Sheep with no shepherd. Everybody. Sometimes the louder they scream, everybody has a story and pain and hurt. And they're masking it. They're trying to drive it down. And so they put on a show, they put on a face, and we're divisive, we separate, all right, we got our categories for people, we dismiss, but what are they? They're sheep without a shepherd. So liberals are people I can avoid. Gun-toting rednecks will never learn. These aren't people, they're the enemy. They're a category to dismiss. And because of that, the mission of God suffers. Because our vision is so partisan, it's so political. And I'm not saying that Christians shouldn't be involved in politics. I think that we should be involved in politics. What I am saying is that politics should not be our first mission. But it often is. We don't believe the gospel is our hope. So our neighbors, they know our views on abortion. They know our views on concealed carry, paid parental leave, the Mueller investigation, the water problem in Flint, Michigan, but they never know about Jesus from our lips. Why is that? There's no political solution for what ails us. Can I say that again? There is no political solution for what ails us. We must regain a holy vision for the people around us. We must. What our neighbors really need, What your friends on Facebook really need is not to vote like you. They need Jesus. And it's not that these topics can't be discussed, and it could go a long way to have a good testimony to be able to discuss these topics in a correct way with love and compassion. It's just that it's about all that we discuss, right? I mean, usually, these are sheep with no shepherd who need a big, giant dose of Jesus. And our neighbors need Jesus. Our country needs Jesus. The Thais need Jesus. And seeing people like Jesus means that our first thought when neighbors move in is not like, immigrants, there goes the neighborhood. It's sheep who have no shepherd. Let's go learn to like what they like. Let's take an interest in their culture. What an open door for the gospel. For decades, the American church has prayed the gospel would advance. We support and we send missionaries all over the world. But for years, the world has come to us. What a fantastic opportunity. Maybe these sheep who have no shepherd could hear about the good shepherd from you. Verse 37, look what Jesus says. The harvest is plenteous, but the laborers are few. Pray the Lord of the harvest would send forth laborers. I tell you what, that's the prayer at the Dove Church. That God would send laborers from this church out into his harvest, locally, nationally, internationally. You know, interesting thing, one of the things that opened our eyes while we were in Thailand, I talked about this at different times with the group, because the world is changing, because of like what they call globalization, companies, even mid-sized companies, have offices all over the world. All over the world. It's changing the face of missions. And so maybe God would call you to be like the Joneses and to start a church overseas. And I'll tell you what, if God does that, you have this church, we will line up behind you and help you with that. You have an army of people to help you. But maybe that's not you. And it doesn't have to be you. God doesn't call everybody to do that. But your skills might move you to a foreign country through your company for a few years. Maybe move you to Asia. Move you to Eastern Europe. And what if you connected with a missionary while you were over there? We learned that about the Joneses. We were talking about that, man. If somebody was in Thailand because of other work opportunities, what a blessing and a shot in the arm that would be for them just to have a teammate who was just behind the scenes, encouraging, helping, same vision. What an opportunity that could be for you. Now, I'm not called to be a church planter. That's fine. But what if your company moves you overseas? What if you connected with a missionary or a church there? What a fantastic opportunity. And think about this. You would be advancing the gospel and Nissan would pay for it. Right? Think of, like forever we've been doing that through church donations and it'll continue. But now Fortune 500 companies are paying us to go over there. What a huge opportunity. English as a second language is providing opportunities all over the world. They need native English speakers. Countries are now courting retirees. Ginger and I learned this at a missions conference we went to a year ago with the Southern Baptist Convention. There are certain countries that are courting retirees, offering nice housing and a stipend just to come and teach like native English, not like because you need a degree as an English professor, just conversational English in a classroom, helping them with job interviews, helping them to learn regular vocabulary. They need native English speakers, and because of this, countries are paying for us to go there. We used to have to fund and support people to go to the world. Now the world is paying us to come to them. What a great opportunity. And they need native English speakers, not this British English stuff, okay? All right? I mean, it's really good, okay? Don't get me wrong, but like I was in the van with the Joneses. We were on a 7-hour drive, and their youngest son was in the car with me, and he was talking about distances in kilometers. And I said, what are you saying this kilometer stuff, son? You're an American. We don't use kilometers. He said, the rest of the world uses kilometers. And I said, listen, there are two types of countries in this world, okay? Countries that use the metric system and countries that put somebody on the moon, all right? So you get that right, and you get that right, okay? Obviously, I'm just kidding, okay? I'm just kidding. I did tell him that, okay? I did tell him that. But they need native English speakers. And because they need native English speakers, we can be missionaries in our golden years, and Vietnam will pay for it. How radical is that? Incredible opportunities in our neighborhood, incredible opportunities in our cities, in our country, and incredible opportunities around the world. But our hearts our eyes, they have to be open to it. They have to change. We have to see people like Jesus sees them, sheep with no shepherd. And so in the name of Jesus, may it be so. Let's close in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you, Lord, for how much you love us. We thank you that Jesus would leave his home and come to rescue, to ransom, to redeem. We have salvation today because of what Jesus did, and so we thank you for that. And I'm praying, Lord, for the many people here. I'm praying for maybe somebody here that you've been working on their heart, and maybe you're beginning to knock on the door there for them about missions, about ministry. I'm praying, Lord, that you would just initiate that calling in them, that they would obey. I'm praying, Lord, for the many opportunities all of us have. Our neighbors, our co-workers, people around us, sheep with no shepherd, that we would see them like you see them, that we would have compassion, and we'd tell them why Jesus came and who he is. As the instruments play, here's your time to speak with God, and maybe you're answering that call to full-time ministry, to missions. Tell God today, Lord, I'll obey. I'll go. Maybe you're here and God's just working in your heart about somebody else, helping you change your view about who they are. You're really somebody who's hurting down deep, sheep without a shepherd. And maybe God's placed you there to tell them about the good shepherd. As the instruments play, here's your time to speak with God.